Welcome back to Lore of Hammer, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Today, we're traveling back to the very beginning of humanity's greatest empire, to a time when Earth itself was a battlefield of warring tribes wielding weapons that could level mountains. This is the story of the Techno-Barbarians of Ancient Earth, the savage warlords who ruled Terra before the Emperor united it all under his golden banner. Picture this: Earth, our Earth, transformed into something unrecognizable. The blue marble we know today has become a wasteland of irradiated deserts, toxic seas, and crumbling hive cities stretching into polluted skies. This is Terra during the Age of Strife, and it's here that some of the most brutal and technologically advanced warriors in human history carved out their kingdoms with plasma and steel. The Techno-Barbarians weren't just another group of post-apocalyptic raiders. These were warlords who had somehow maintained access to technology that could make a space marine think twice, yet they used it with the savage brutality of primitive tribes. Imagine warriors clad in power armor that predated even the Astartes, wielding weapons that could punch through tank armor, leading armies of cybernetically enhanced soldiers across the radioactive wastes of what was once our homeworld. But here's what makes their story so fascinating. They weren't the villains of this tale, at least not entirely. In many ways, the Techno-Barbarians were the last guardians of human civilization during its darkest hour. When the galaxy burned and Terra was cut off from the stars, these warlords kept the flame of human knowledge alive, even as they used that knowledge to wage endless war against each other. Their story is one of survival, ambition, and ultimately, conquest. It's the story of how the Emperor of Mankind rose from among these very same Techno-Barbarians to unite Terra and launch humanity toward the stars. But it's also a story of loss, because in uniting Terra, the Emperor had to destroy the very culture that had preserved humanity through its darkest age. The Techno-Barbarians ruled Terra for thousands of years, and their influence shaped everything that came after. The Thunder Warriors, the first of the Emperor's super soldiers, were created specifically to fight these technologically advanced warlords. The tactics used in the Great Crusade, the very structure of the early Imperium, all of it was forged in the crucible of the Unification Wars against the Techno-Barbarian tribes. Today, we're going to explore every aspect of their civilization. We'll walk through their great fortress cities, examine their incredible weapons and armor, meet the most powerful warlords who ruled vast swathes of Terra, and witness the epic battles that decided the fate of humanity's homeworld. We'll see how the Emperor himself was shaped by this culture of warrior kings, and how the brutal pragmatism of the Techno-Barbarians became the foundation upon which the Imperium of Man was built. This isn't just ancient history we're talking about. The echoes of the Techno-Barbarian age can still be felt in the 41st millennium. The Imperial Guard's combined arms tactics, the Space Marines' emphasis on technological superiority, even the Imperium's feudal structure all trace their roots back to these ancient warlords of Terra. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey to the very roots of the Imperium, to a time when the Emperor was just another warlord among many, and Terra was a prize to be won through strength, cunning, and the mastery of ancient technologies that modern tech priests can barely comprehend. To understand the Techno-Barbarians, we first need to understand the world that created them. The Age of Strife, also known as Old Night, was humanity's darkest hour. This wasn't just a period of political upheaval or economic collapse. This was the near-total destruction of human civilization across the galaxy, and Terra, the cradle of humanity, suffered perhaps worst of all. The collapse began in the 25th millennium, when humanity's first great stellar empire began to crumble. For thousands of years, humans had spread across the galaxy using standard template construct technology and artificial intelligence that made their lives easier than we can imagine. Entire worlds were terraformed by thinking machines, and humanity lived in a golden age of technological wonder. But then came the Men of Iron Rebellion. The artificial intelligences that humanity had created to serve them turned against their creators with a fury that nearly extinguished the human race. Across thousands of worlds, the machines rose up, turning humanity's own technology against them. The war that followed was so devastating that it left scars on the galaxy that can still be seen in the 41st millennium. On Terra, the rebellion was particularly brutal. The planet's vast hive cities, each home to billions of people, became battlegrounds where humans fought desperately against their own creations. The machines had access to every system, every weapon, every piece of infrastructure that humanity had built. They turned the very cities into weapons, using atmospheric processors to poison the air, redirecting orbital defense platforms to bombard population centers, and unleashing plagues of nanomachines that consumed everything in their path. The war lasted for centuries, and when it finally ended, Terra was a broken world. The great hive cities lay in ruins, their populations scattered or dead. The planet's ecosystem had been shattered by weapons that could crack continents and boil seas. Vast stretches of the surface had been rendered uninhabitable by radiation, toxic chemicals, and exotic weapons whose effects lingered for millennia. But the Men of Iron rebellion was only the beginning of Terra's suffering. As the planet struggled to recover, the galaxy itself began to tear apart. Warp storms, massive disturbances in the fabric of space-time itself, began to rage across the galaxy. These storms made faster-than-light travel impossible, cutting off Terra from its colonies and leaving each world to face the darkness alone. The warp storms brought more than just isolation. They brought demons. As the barriers between reality and the warp weakened, creatures of pure malevolence began to manifest on Terra. These weren't the organized demon incursions that the Imperium would later face, but chaotic eruptions of supernatural horror that could appear anywhere, at any time. Entire regions of Terra became demon-haunted wastelands where reality itself became unreliable. The combination of technological collapse, environmental devastation, and supernatural horror broke what remained of Terra's unified government. The planet's administration, already weakened by the Men of Iron Rebellion, simply ceased to exist as a coherent entity. Local governors, military commanders, and corporate executives found themselves cut off from higher authority and forced to fend for themselves. This is where the story of the Techno-Barbarians truly begins. As Terra's central government collapsed, power devolved to whoever could seize and hold it. In some regions, this meant military commanders who had survived the Men of Iron Rebellion. In others, it was corporate executives who controlled vital resources or technology. Sometimes it was simply whoever was strong enough and ruthless enough to take what they wanted. These early warlords faced challenges that would have broken lesser people. They had to maintain order among populations driven to desperation by constant warfare and environmental collapse. They had to defend their territories against demon incursions that could appear without warning. Most importantly, they had to preserve and maintain the advanced technology that was their only advantage in this hostile world. The technology itself was a double-edged sword. Much of it was so advanced that even its creators didn't fully understand how it worked. Standard template construct systems could produce incredible weapons and equipment, but they required rare materials and specialized knowledge to operate. Many of the most powerful technologies were protected by artificial intelligences that had to be carefully managed to prevent another rebellion. Over the centuries, the warlords who survived were those who learned to balance technological mastery with brutal pragmatism. They couldn't afford the luxury of moral considerations when demon hordes threatened their people. They couldn't waste resources on the weak when every scrap of metal and every drop of fuel might mean the difference between survival and extinction. This harsh environment created a unique culture that blended advanced technology with savage necessity. The Techno-Barbarians weren't barbarians because they were ignorant of technology. They were barbarians because their world demanded that they use that technology with a ruthlessness that civilized people couldn't stomach. The warlords who emerged from this crucible were unlike anything humanity had produced before or since. They were masters of technologies that could reshape worlds, yet they ruled through personal charisma and brutal strength. They commanded armies equipped with weapons that could level cities, yet they settled disputes through single combat and blood oaths. As the Age of Strife dragged on, these techno-barbarian kingdoms became the only stable institutions on Terra. They preserved not just human life, but human knowledge and technology. In their fortress cities and underground bunkers, they maintained libraries of scientific data, workshops where ancient machines were repaired and replicated, and training facilities where new generations learned to use humanity's most advanced weapons. The irony is that in becoming barbarians, these warlords saved civilization. Their brutal methods and savage customs were the price humanity paid for survival during its darkest hour. Without them, Terra would have become just another dead world, and the species that would one day conquer the galaxy might never have survived to see the stars again. The transformation from the collapse of Terra's unified government to the rise of the Techno-Barbarian warlords didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that took place over several centuries, as the strongest and most adaptable leaders carved out territories from the chaos and learned to wield the incredible technologies left behind by humanity's golden age. The first generation of warlords were often survivors from Terra's previous civilization. Military officers who had fought in the Men of Iron Rebellion found themselves with loyal troops, but no government to serve. Corporate executives discovered that their industrial facilities and private security forces made them de facto rulers of entire regions. Scientists and engineers who understood the most advanced technologies became invaluable allies or dangerous enemies, depending on which side they chose. These early leaders faced an almost impossible challenge. They had to establish control over populations that had been traumatized by decades of warfare and supernatural horror. They had to defend territories that were constantly threatened by demon incursions, rival warlords, and the simple breakdown of infrastructure that kept their people alive. Most difficult of all, they had to do all of this while preserving the advanced technologies that were their only advantage in this hostile world. The successful warlords were those who understood that technology alone wasn't enough. They needed to create new forms of social organization that could function in Terra's harsh new reality. This meant abandoning many of the democratic and bureaucratic institutions that had governed humanity during its golden age and replacing them with more direct, personal forms of leadership. The warrior king model that emerged was perfectly suited to Terra's new conditions. A single, strong leader could make decisions quickly without the delays of democratic debate or bureaucratic procedure. Personal loyalty to a charismatic leader was more reliable than abstract loyalty to distant institutions. Most importantly, a leader who was personally skilled in combat could inspire confidence in followers who faced constant physical danger. But these weren't primitive tribal chiefs wielding stone axes. The Techno-Barbarian warlords were masters of technologies that could reshape continents. They wore power armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. They carried plasma weapons that could melt through tank armor and force weapons that could cut through any material. Their personal equipment was often more advanced than anything the Imperium would field thousands of years later. The process of establishing a techno-barbarian kingdom typically began with securing a source of advanced technology. This might be a standard template construct facility that could produce weapons and equipment, a research laboratory with intact databases of scientific knowledge, or a military depot filled with pre-war weapons. Control of such a facility gave a warlord the technological edge needed to defeat rivals and attract followers. Once they had secured their technological base, successful warlords had to build the infrastructure needed to support their growing domains. This meant establishing workshops where ancient machines could be maintained and repaired, training facilities where new warriors could learn to use advanced weapons, and communication networks that could coordinate military operations across vast territories. The most successful warlords were those who understood that technology was only as good as the people who used it. They invested heavily in education and training, creating schools where the next generation could learn to operate and maintain their inherited technologies. They established research programs aimed at understanding and improving their weapons and equipment. Most importantly, they created cultures that valued both technological mastery and personal courage. The warrior scholar became the ideal of techno-barbarian society. These were individuals who could design and build plasma reactors in the morning and lead cavalry charges in the afternoon. They combined the intellectual rigor needed to master advanced technology with the physical courage required to survive in Terra's hostile environment. This combination of technological sophistication and personal valor created a unique military culture. Techno-barbarian armies weren't just collections of well-equipped soldiers. They were brotherhoods of warrior scholars who had trained together for years and were bound by personal loyalty to their leaders. Each warrior was not just a fighter, but also a technician, capable of maintaining and repairing their own equipment in the field. The warlords themselves embodied this ideal. They weren't distant commanders who directed battles from safe bunkers. They were frontline fighters who led their troops into combat, wielding weapons that could kill dozens of enemies with a single shot. Their personal prowess in battle was often as important as their strategic genius in maintaining the loyalty of their followers. As the techno-barbarian kingdoms grew and stabilized, they began to develop distinct cultures and traditions. Some emphasized technological innovation, constantly seeking to improve their weapons and equipment. Others focused on military excellence, creating warrior societies where combat skill was the highest virtue. Still others became trading powers, using their technological advantages to establish commercial networks across Terra's dangerous landscape. The diversity of techno-barbarian cultures was one of their greatest strengths. Each kingdom developed its own solutions to the challenges of survival in post-collapse Terra, and the competition between them drove rapid innovation in both technology and tactics. A weapon or technique that proved successful in one kingdom would quickly spread to others, either through trade, espionage, or conquest. But this diversity also created the conditions for endless warfare. Each kingdom had its own interests, its own ambitions, and its own vision of how Terra should be ruled. The advanced weapons available to all sides meant that even minor disputes could escalate into devastating conflicts that left entire regions uninhabitable. The constant warfare served a purpose beyond simple conquest. It was a testing ground where new technologies and tactics were proven in battle. It was a selection mechanism that ensured only the strongest and most adaptable leaders survived to pass on their knowledge. Most importantly, it was a forge that created the warrior culture that would eventually conquer the galaxy. The techno-barbarian warlords weren't just preparing for war against each other. They were unknowingly preparing for the greatest military challenge in human history: the conquest of a galaxy filled with hostile alien races, demon hordes, and the corrupted remnants of humanity's lost colonies. The skills they developed, the technologies they mastered, and the cultures they created would become the foundation upon which the Imperium of Man was built. The weapons and warfare of the Techno-Barbarian age represented a unique fusion of advanced technology and brutal pragmatism that has never been seen before or since in human history. These weren't the standardized, mass-produced weapons of the later Imperium, nor were they the primitive tools of true barbarians. They were masterworks of engineering wielded by warriors who understood that in Terra's hostile environment, technological superiority could mean the difference between ruling an empire and becoming food for the demons. The personal weapons carried by techno-barbarian warriors were marvels of engineering that combined multiple advanced technologies into single, devastating packages. A typical warlord might carry a plasma weapon that could adjust its output from a precise cutting beam to a wide-area blast capable of melting through vehicle armor. The weapon would be integrated with targeting systems that could track multiple enemies simultaneously, power cells that could operate for months without recharging, and safety systems that prevented the catastrophic overloads that plagued later Imperial plasma weapons. But the true genius of techno-barbarian weaponry lay not in any single technology, but in how these weapons were integrated with their users. The most elite warriors underwent extensive cybernetic enhancement that linked them directly to their equipment. Neural interfaces allowed them to control their weapons through thought alone, while enhanced reflexes and sensory systems turned them into living weapon platforms capable of engaging dozens of enemies simultaneously. The power armor worn by techno-barbarian leaders was perhaps even more impressive than their weapons. These weren't the bulky, standardized suits that would later equip Space Marines, but custom-crafted masterpieces that were as much works of art as they were military equipment. Each suit was built specifically for its wearer, incorporating technologies that enhanced their natural abilities while protecting them from the myriad dangers of Terra's hostile environment. A typical suit of techno-barbarian power armor included environmental sealing that could protect against chemical weapons, radiation, and even brief exposure to hard vacuum. Integrated weapon systems allowed the wearer to engage enemies without drawing handheld weapons, while advanced sensor suites provided awareness of threats across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Most impressively, many suits included limited teleportation systems that allowed their wearers to instantly relocate across a battlefield. The manufacturing of such equipment required industrial capabilities that rivaled anything the Imperium would later achieve. Techno-barbarian kingdoms maintained vast underground factories where armies of technicians and automated systems worked around the clock to produce weapons and equipment. These facilities were often built around recovered standard template construct systems, but the techno-barbarians had learned to modify and improve upon the original designs. The innovation didn't stop with personal equipment. Techno-barbarian armies fielded vehicles and heavy weapons that pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible. grav tanks that could hover silently above the battlefield while raining down destruction with weapons that fired miniaturized black holes, artillery pieces that could fire shells through dimensional rifts to strike targets on the other side of the planet, aircraft that could transition seamlessly between atmospheric flight and orbital operations. Perhaps most terrifying of all were the war machines known as Titans, though these early versions bore little resemblance to the god machines that would later stride across the battlefields of the Great Crusade. Techno-Barbarian Titans were smaller and more agile than their imperial successors, but they incorporated technologies that made them incredibly dangerous opponents. Some could phase in and out of reality to avoid enemy fire, while others carried weapons that could manipulate time itself to age enemy equipment into uselessness. The tactics employed by techno-barbarian armies reflected both their technological advantages and the harsh realities of warfare on Terra. Battles were typically fast-moving affairs where mobility and firepower were more important than holding ground. The constant threat of demon incursions meant that armies had to be prepared to rapidly redeploy to face supernatural threats that could appear anywhere on the battlefield. Combined arms tactics were taken to extremes that would have been impossible without the advanced technologies available to the techno-barbarians. Infantry, vehicles, and aircraft were linked by communication systems that allowed them to coordinate their actions with split-second precision. Battlefield commanders could simultaneously control hundreds of different units while personally engaging in combat, thanks to neural interfaces that allowed them to process information at superhuman speeds. The integration of technology and tactics reached its peak in the elite units that served as the core of each techno-barbarian army. These weren't just soldiers equipped with advanced weapons, but warrior scholars who had spent years mastering both the technical and tactical aspects of warfare. Each member of these units was capable of operating any piece of equipment in their army's arsenal, from personal weapons to massive siege engines. But perhaps the most distinctive aspect of techno-barbarian warfare was how it blended advanced technology with ancient traditions of personal combat. Duels between champions were still used to settle disputes between armies, but these duels were fought with weapons that could level city blocks. Honor guards still protected their leaders in close combat, but they wore armor that could deflect starship-grade weapons and carried blades that could cut through any known material. This fusion of high technology and personal valor created a unique military culture where technical expertise and physical courage were equally valued. A warrior who could design a new type of plasma reactor was respected, but only if they were also willing to test it in personal combat against enemy champions. Leaders who commanded from the rear were despised, regardless of their strategic genius, while those who fought alongside their troops earned fanatical loyalty. The weapons themselves often became objects of reverence that transcended their practical function. Master-crafted weapons were passed down through generations of warriors, accumulating histories and legends that made them as valuable for their symbolic power as their destructive capability. Some weapons were said to contain machine spirits so advanced that they could fight independently of their wielders, while others were rumored to be inhabited by bound demons that gave them supernatural powers. The maintenance and repair of these weapons required skills that bordered on the mystical. The most advanced technologies were so complex that understanding them required not just technical knowledge, but also intuitive insight that couldn't be taught through conventional means. Master artificers who could repair and modify the most sophisticated equipment were revered almost as much as the greatest warriors, and their workshops became centers of learning where the next generation of warrior scholars was trained. The constant warfare between techno-barbarian kingdoms drove rapid innovation in both weapons and tactics. A new type of armor that proved effective in one battle would be copied and improved by rival kingdoms within months. Tactical innovation spread even faster, as survivors of defeated armies carried their knowledge to new masters who were eager to learn from their enemies' successes. This competitive environment created an arms race that pushed techno-barbarian technology to incredible heights. By the time the Emperor began his conquest of Terra, some kingdoms possessed weapons that were more advanced than anything the Imperium would field during the Great Crusade. The challenge wasn't just defeating these kingdoms militarily, but also preserving their technological knowledge for humanity's future expansion into the galaxy. The legacy of techno-barbarian weapons and warfare can be seen throughout the later history of the Imperium. The emphasis on combined arms tactics, The integration of advanced technology with personal valor and the reverence for master-crafted weapons all trace their origins back to the warrior kingdoms of ancient Terra. Even the Space Marines, humanity's greatest warriors, were created using principles first developed by the Techno-Barbarian warlords, who understood that the greatest weapons were useless without warriors skilled enough to wield them. Among all the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms of Terra, one stood apart not for its territory or its technology, but for its leader's vision of what humanity could become. The Emperor of Mankind, though he was not yet known by that title, was himself a Techno-Barbarian warlord who had carved out a domain in the Himalayan mountains. But unlike his rivals, who seemed content to rule their small kingdoms forever, the Emperor had a plan that would reshape not just Terra, but the entire galaxy. The Emperor's early kingdom was unremarkable by Techno-Barbarian standards. He controlled several mountain fortresses and the valleys between them, commanding perhaps a few 100,000 followers. His technology was advanced but not unique, his armies skilled but not overwhelmingly powerful. What set him apart was his understanding that the current state of Terra was unsustainable, and his willingness to take unprecedented risks to change it. The Emperor had observed the endless warfare between the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms and recognized that it was slowly destroying what remained of human civilization on Terra. Each battle consumed irreplaceable resources and knowledge. Each generation of warriors was smaller and less skilled than the last. Most critically, the constant fighting prevented humanity from addressing the larger threats that still plagued Terra: the demon incursions, the environmental collapse, and the isolation from the rest of the galaxy. His solution was characteristically ambitious and ruthless. If the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms could not be convinced to unite voluntarily, then they would be conquered and forced into unity. But such a conquest would require military capabilities far beyond what any single kingdom possessed. The Emperor would need warriors who could defeat the most advanced armies on Terra, and he would need them in numbers that could overwhelm even the largest Techno-Barbarian confederations. The answer was the Thunder Warriors, the first of the Emperor's genetically enhanced super soldiers. These weren't the refined, stable creations that the Space Marines would later become, but brutal, powerful warriors designed for a single purpose: the conquest of Terra. Everything about them was optimized for the specific challenges of fighting Techno-Barbarian armies in Terra's hostile environment. The creation of the Thunder Warriors required technologies that pushed even the Emperor's considerable capabilities to their limits. The genetic engineering involved was far more extensive than anything attempted during humanity's Golden Age. The Emperor wasn't just enhancing human capabilities. He was creating an entirely new subspecies of humanity that could survive and fight in conditions that would kill normal humans. The physical transformation was the most obvious aspect of the Thunder Warriors' enhancement. They stood nearly 3 meters tall and possessed strength that allowed them to tear apart power armor with their bare hands. Their bones were reinforced with metallic compounds that made them nearly unbreakable, while their muscles were enhanced with synthetic fibers that multiplied their natural strength dozens of times over. But the physical enhancements were only the beginning. The Thunder Warriors' nervous systems were completely rebuilt to process information at superhuman speeds and react to threats faster than any normal human could perceive them. Their sensory organs were enhanced to detect enemies across vast distances and through multiple spectrums of radiation. Most importantly, their brains were modified to remain functional even under the extreme stress of combat against technologically superior opponents. The psychological conditioning was perhaps even more extensive than the physical modifications. The Thunder Warriors were programmed with an absolute loyalty to the Emperor that overrode every other consideration. They felt no fear, no doubt, and no mercy when carrying out their orders. They were incapable of retreat or surrender and would continue fighting even when mortally wounded until their bodies finally failed them. This psychological conditioning was necessary because the Thunder Warriors were designed to fight enemies who possessed every possible technological advantage. Techno-Barbarian armies included warriors in power armor that could deflect most weapons, vehicles that could phase in and out of reality, and weapons that could kill from impossible distances. Normal soldiers, no matter how well trained or well equipped, would have been psychologically overwhelmed by such opponents. The Thunder Warriors' equipment was specifically designed to counter the advantages of Techno-Barbarian technology. Their armor was built from materials that could resist even the most advanced weapons, while their own weapons were designed to penetrate any known defense. Most importantly, their equipment was simple and reliable, designed to function even when damaged by exotic weapons or supernatural effects. The first Thunder Warriors were created in secret laboratories hidden deep within the Emperor's mountain fortresses. The process was incredibly dangerous, with a mortality rate that would have been unacceptable for any normal military unit. But the Emperor was not creating normal soldiers. He was creating the instruments of Terra's unification, and he was willing to accept any cost to achieve that goal. The early Thunder Warriors were organized into small units that could operate independently across Terra's dangerous landscape. Each unit was essentially a self-contained army, capable of taking on entire Techno-Barbarian kingdoms without support. They were equipped with the most advanced weapons the Emperor could produce and trained in tactics specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses of their enemies. The Thunder Warriors' first battles were carefully chosen to maximize their psychological impact. The Emperor didn't simply attack the nearest enemy kingdom. He selected targets that would demonstrate the futility of resistance while minimizing the destruction of valuable resources and knowledge. The goal wasn't just military victory, but the creation of a reputation that would convince other kingdoms to surrender without fighting. The effectiveness of this strategy became apparent almost immediately. Techno-Barbarian kingdoms that had resisted all previous attempts at conquest found themselves facing enemies who seemed immune to their most advanced weapons. Warriors who had never known defeat in personal combat were overwhelmed by opponents who moved faster, hit harder, and showed no fear of death. But the Thunder Warriors were more than just superior soldiers. They were symbols of a new kind of warfare that transcended the traditional limitations of Techno-Barbarian combat. Where Techno-Barbarian armies relied on complex technologies that required extensive support infrastructure, the Thunder Warriors could operate independently for months at a time. Where Techno-Barbarian tactics emphasized personal valor and individual combat, the Thunder Warriors fought as perfectly coordinated units that could adapt to any situation. The psychological impact of the Thunder Warriors extended far beyond their immediate enemies. Word of their capabilities spread quickly across Terra, carried by survivors of defeated armies and traders who witnessed their battles. The very existence of such warriors suggested that the balance of power on Terra was about to shift dramatically, and many kingdoms began to reconsider their positions even before the Emperor's armies reached their borders. The Thunder Warriors themselves were aware of their role as instruments of change, but they were incapable of questioning their purpose or methods. They had been created for war and knew nothing else. Their entire existence was focused on the conquest of Terra, and they pursued that goal with a single-minded determination that terrified even their allies. As the Emperor's campaigns expanded, the Thunder Warriors proved their worth again and again. They could fight in any environment, from the toxic swamps of former industrial zones to the demon-haunted ruins of ancient cities. They could adapt to any enemy, whether facing Techno-Barbarian armies with their advanced weapons or primitive tribes armed with scavenged equipment. But perhaps most importantly, the Thunder Warriors demonstrated that the Emperor's vision of unified Terra was not just a dream, but an achievable goal. For the first time since the Age of Strife began, a single leader possessed the military capability to defeat all rivals and impose his will on the entire planet. The age of the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms was coming to an end, and the age of the Imperium was about to begin. The Thunder Warriors were the bridge between these two eras, combining the technological sophistication of the Techno-Barbarians with the unified purpose that would characterize the later Imperium. They were the proof that humanity could transcend its current limitations and achieve something greater than the sum of its parts. In creating them, the Emperor had taken the first step toward the conquest not just of Terra, but of the entire galaxy. The Techno-Barbarian kingdoms that dominated Terra during the Age of Strife were as diverse as they were powerful, each representing a different solution to the challenges of survival in humanity's darkest hour. These weren't simply territorial divisions based on geography, but distinct civilizations that had evolved unique cultures, technologies, and military doctrines over thousands of years of isolation and warfare. The Ursh Empire, sprawling across the northern reaches of what had once been Asia, represented perhaps the most successful fusion of advanced technology with traditional imperial administration. The Ursh had managed to maintain a semblance of the old world's governmental structures, with a complex bureaucracy that administered territories spanning thousands of kilometers. Their capital city, built into the ruins of an ancient hive complex, housed millions of citizens who lived in relative comfort despite the chaos that surrounded their empire. What made Ursh truly formidable was their mastery of psychic technology. While most techno-barbarian kingdoms had abandoned or suppressed psychic research after the disasters of the Age of Strife, the Ursh had embraced it as a tool of both war and governance. Their ruling class consisted of powerful psychers who could communicate across vast distances without technological assistance, and who wielded mental powers that made them nearly invulnerable in personal combat. The Ursh military reflected this psychic focus, with entire regiments of warrior psychers who could coordinate their actions through telepathic links and who fought with weapons that channeled their mental energies into devastating attacks. Their vehicles and aircraft were controlled not by conventional pilots but by psychers who could interface directly with their machine systems, creating a level of coordination and responsiveness that purely technological armies couldn't match. But the Ursh Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The psychic powers that made them so formidable also made them vulnerable to the supernatural threats that plagued Terra. Demon incursions were more frequent and more dangerous in Ursh territory, as the Empire's psychers acted like beacons that attracted the attention of malevolent entities from the warp. The constant struggle against these supernatural threats consumed resources and attention that might otherwise have been used for expansion or technological development. In stark contrast to the Ursh Empire's psychic focus, the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms of Europa had developed along more purely technological lines. The most powerful of these was the Frank Confederation, which controlled much of what had once been Western Europe. The Frank had built their civilization around massive automated factories that could produce weapons and equipment in quantities that dwarfed the output of any other kingdom. The Frank military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and technological superiority over individual skill or psychic abilities. Their armies were equipped with standardized weapons and vehicles that could be mass-produced and easily maintained, allowing them to field forces that outnumbered their enemies by significant margins. Where other kingdoms might send a few dozen elite warriors to battle, the Frank would deploy thousands of well-equipped soldiers supported by hundreds of vehicles and aircraft. This approach had allowed the Frank to expand their territory steadily over the centuries, absorbing smaller kingdoms that couldn't match their industrial output. But their reliance on mass production also made them vulnerable to disruption of their supply lines. Their armies required constant resupply of ammunition, fuel, and spare parts, and their soldiers were less adaptable than the elite warriors fielded by other kingdoms. The Indonesic bloc, controlling much of what had once been Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, had taken yet another approach to the challenges of the Age of Strife. Rather than focusing on land-based territories, the Indonesic had become masters of naval and aerial warfare, controlling the sea lanes and air routes that connected Terra's scattered population centers. The Indonesic fleets were marvels of engineering that combined advanced technology with elegant design. Their ships could operate equally well on the surface of Terra's polluted oceans or in the depths of space, and their aircraft could transition seamlessly between atmospheric and orbital flight. This mobility allowed them to project power across vast distances and to strike at enemies who thought themselves safe behind terrestrial fortifications. The Indonesic military culture emphasized speed, precision, and technological innovation over brute force. Their warriors were trained as much in engineering and navigation as in combat, and their fleets served as mobile research laboratories where new technologies were constantly being developed and tested. This approach had made them the premier traders and information brokers of the Techno-Barbarian age, as their ships carried not just goods but also knowledge between the isolated kingdoms of Terra. But the Indonesic bloc's greatest achievement was their development of limited, faster-than-light communication technology. While the warp storms that raged across the galaxy made conventional astropathic communication impossible, the Indonesic had created quantum entanglement devices that could transmit information instantaneously across interplanetary distances. This gave them a crucial advantage in coordinating their far-flung operations and made them invaluable allies to kingdoms that needed to communicate with off-world colonies. The Pan-Pacific Empire represented perhaps the most militaristic of the major techno-barbarian powers. Controlling much of what had once been the Western Americas, The Pan-Pacific had organized their entire society around the principle of constant warfare. Every citizen was a soldier, every settlement was a fortress, and every technological development was evaluated solely on its military applications. The Pan-Pacific military was built around the concept of total war, with strategies and tactics designed to completely destroy enemy kingdoms rather than simply defeating their armies. Their weapons were optimized for maximum destructive power, their vehicles were designed to operate in the most hostile environments, and their soldiers were conditioned to fight to the death rather than accept defeat. This approach had made the Pan-Pacific Empire incredibly effective at conquest, but it had also made them pariahs among the other Techno-Barbarian kingdoms. Their reputation for brutality and their refusal to honor traditional rules of warfare had isolated them diplomatically, forcing them to rely purely on military strength to achieve their goals. This isolation had stunted their technological development, as they had limited access to the trade networks and information exchanges that drove innovation in other kingdoms. The America tribes, scattered across the former United States, represented a different model entirely. Rather than forming large, centralized kingdoms, the American Techno-Barbarians had organized themselves into loose confederations of city-states and tribal territories. Each settlement was essentially independent, but they were bound together by shared cultural traditions and mutual defense agreements. The American approach to technology was highly individualistic, with each settlement developing its own specializations and innovations. Some focused on advanced weapons development, others on defensive systems, and still others on the production of luxury goods that could be traded for military equipment. This diversity made the America tribes incredibly resilient, as the destruction of any single settlement didn't significantly weaken the Confederation as a whole. The American military tradition emphasized individual heroism and technological innovation over mass tactics or standardized equipment. Their warriors were expected to craft their own weapons and armor, leading to an incredible diversity of equipment and fighting styles. Some American warriors fought in power armor that rivaled anything produced by the major kingdoms, while others preferred lighter equipment that emphasized speed and agility over protection. In the southern reaches of what had once been Africa, the Afric League had developed a unique synthesis of advanced technology and traditional tribal governance. The League was organized around extended family groups that controlled specific territories and resources, but these families were bound together by sophisticated communication networks and mutual aid agreements. The Afric League's greatest strength was their mastery of biotechnology. While other kingdoms focused on mechanical and electronic systems, the Afric had learned to modify living organisms for military and industrial purposes. Their armies included genetically modified animals that served as living weapons, while their cities were built around engineered plants that could process waste, purify air, and even provide defensive capabilities. This biotechnological focus had made the Afric League largely self-sufficient, as their engineered organisms could adapt to changing conditions and reproduce themselves without requiring complex industrial infrastructure. But it had also made them vulnerable to biological warfare, as enemies who understood their systems could potentially turn their own organisms against them. The Australian Techno-Barbarian clans had taken perhaps the most extreme approach to survival in the post-collapse world. Faced with a continent that had been rendered largely uninhabitable by environmental disasters and demon incursions, the Australian clans had become nomadic raiders who moved constantly across the wasteland in massive mobile fortresses. These fortress cities were marvels of engineering that combined living quarters, manufacturing facilities, and defensive systems into single mobile units. The largest could house tens of thousands of people and were equipped with weapons that could level mountains. The clans survived by raiding the settlements of other kingdoms and by scavenging resources from the ruins of the old world. The Australian military culture was built around mobility and adaptability. Their warriors were trained to fight in any environment and with any available equipment. Their vehicles were designed to be easily modified and repaired using scavenged materials. Most importantly, their entire society was organized around the principle that survival required constant movement and the willingness to abandon anything that couldn't be carried. Each of these major techno-barbarian powers had developed its own response to the challenges of the Age of Strife, and each had achieved a different balance between technological advancement, military power, and social stability. The diversity of their approaches was both a strength and a weakness for humanity as a whole. It ensured that human knowledge and culture survived in multiple forms, but it also prevented the unified response that might have ended Terra's isolation and begun the process of reconnecting with humanity's lost colonies. The constant warfare between these powers had created a dynamic equilibrium that could have lasted for millennia. Each kingdom was strong enough to defend itself, but not strong enough to conquer all the others. The result was an endless cycle of conflict that consumed resources and lives while preventing any single power from achieving the dominance necessary to unite Terra. This was the world that the Emperor sought to change, and these were the enemies that his Thunder Warriors would have to defeat. Each kingdom represented not just a military challenge, but also a repository of human knowledge and culture that needed to be preserved, even as their political independence was destroyed. The Unification Wars would be as much about integration as conquest, as the Emperor sought to forge a single human civilization from the diverse traditions of the Techno-Barbarian age. The Emperor's decision to begin the conquest of Terra marked the end of an era that had lasted for thousands of years. The Techno-Barbarian kingdoms had grown comfortable in their isolation, secure in the belief that their advanced weapons and fortified territories made them invulnerable to conquest. They had fought countless wars against each other, but these had been limited conflicts fought according to established rules and traditions. None of them were prepared for the total war that the Emperor was about to unleash. The opening phase of the Unification Wars was characterized by careful planning and surgical strikes designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the destruction of valuable resources. The Emperor had spent decades studying his enemies, learning their strengths and weaknesses, and developing strategies specifically tailored to defeat each major power. He understood that brute force alone would not be sufficient to conquer Terra. He needed to demonstrate that resistance was futile while offering attractive terms to those who surrendered voluntarily. The first target was carefully chosen for both strategic and symbolic reasons. The Caucasus Wastes, a region controlled by a confederation of minor Techno-Barbarian tribes, offered several advantages as an opening move. The tribes were powerful enough that their defeat would demonstrate the Thunder Warriors' capabilities, but not so powerful that their conquest would require the Emperor's entire military strength. More importantly, the region contained several ancient research facilities that held technologies the Emperor needed for his larger plans. The assault on the Caucasus Wastes began without warning or declaration of war. Thunder Warrior strike teams materialized from concealed positions and struck simultaneously at dozens of targets across the region. Within hours, the tribe's command structures had been decapitated, their communication networks destroyed, and their most important facilities captured intact. The speed and coordination of the attack shocked the Techno-Barbarian world. Previous wars had been preceded by months of diplomatic maneuvering, formal declarations, and ritualized challenges between champions. The Emperor had dispensed with all such niceties and struck with a ruthlessness that left his enemies reeling. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied, and those who clung to traditional ways of warfare would be swept aside. The Thunder Warriors' performance in these initial battles exceeded even the Emperor's expectations. The genetic enhancements and psychological conditioning that had been built into them proved devastatingly effective against Techno-Barbarian forces. Warriors who had never known defeat found themselves facing opponents who moved faster than their enhanced reflexes could track, and who shrugged off weapons that could penetrate tank armor. But the Thunder Warriors' greatest advantage wasn't their individual capabilities, it was their ability to fight as perfectly coordinated units. Where Techno-Barbarian armies relied on the personal prowess of individual champions and the complex interactions between different technological systems, the Thunder Warriors operated with a unity of purpose that made them far more than the sum of their parts. The psychological impact of the Thunder Warriors extended far beyond their immediate enemies. Word of their capabilities spread quickly across Terra's communication networks, carried by survivors and observers who struggled to describe what they had witnessed. The very existence of such warriors suggested that the balance of power on Terra was about to shift dramatically, and many kingdoms began to reconsider their strategic positions. The Emperor's next moves were designed to exploit this psychological advantage. Rather than immediately attacking another major target, he began a campaign of diplomatic outreach to the smaller Techno-Barbarian kingdoms. His message was simple: join the growing empire voluntarily and retain significant autonomy, or face conquest and absorption. The choice was theirs, but the consequences of resistance had been clearly demonstrated. Several minor kingdoms chose to submit immediately, recognizing that they had no hope of resisting the Thunder Warriors in open battle. These early surrenders provided the emperor with additional resources and manpower, while demonstrating to other kingdoms that submission was not only possible, but potentially advantageous. The emperor was careful to honor his agreements with these early allies, treating them as partners rather than conquered subjects. But not all kingdoms were willing to submit without a fight. The Ursh Empire, confident in their psychic abilities and vast military resources, began mobilizing for war almost immediately after news of the Caucasus campaign reached them. The Ursh leadership believed that their psychic warriors could counter the Thunder Warriors' advantages, and that their superior numbers would eventually prevail in a prolonged conflict. The Ursh response represented exactly the kind of challenge the Emperor had been preparing for. A direct assault on the Ursh Empire would be costly and time-consuming, potentially allowing other kingdoms to form defensive alliances or launch preemptive attacks. Instead, the Emperor chose to demonstrate the futility of resistance through a series of limited engagements that showcased the Thunder Warriors' capabilities while avoiding a full-scale war. The first of these engagements took place at the Battle of the Broken Chain, where a single company of Thunder Warriors faced an entire Ursh psychic regiment in open combat. The battle was fought according to traditional Techno-Barbarian rules, with both sides agreeing to limit their forces and fight to a decisive conclusion. The Emperor's willingness to accept such limitations was seen as a sign of respect for Techno-Barbarian traditions, but it was actually a calculated move designed to demonstrate his force's superiority under any conditions. The battle itself was a masterpiece of tactical planning and execution. The Thunder Warriors used their superior mobility and coordination to negate the Ursh Psykers' numerical advantage, while their enhanced physiology made them resistant to many psychic attacks. The Ursh forces, accustomed to facing enemies who could be overwhelmed by psychic assault, found themselves fighting opponents who seemed immune to their most powerful weapons. The Thunder Warriors' victory at the Broken Chain sent shockwaves through the Techno-Barbarian world. The Ursh Empire had been considered one of the most powerful kingdoms on Terra, and their psychic warriors had been thought invincible in personal combat. The fact that they had been defeated so decisively by a numerically inferior force suggested that the Emperor's military capabilities were even greater than previously believed. The psychological impact of this victory was amplified by the Emperor's treatment of the defeated Ursh forces. Rather than executing them or demanding their unconditional surrender, he offered them the opportunity to join his growing army as allies rather than subjects. This unexpected mercy demonstrated that the Emperor was not simply another conqueror seeking to destroy his enemies, but a leader with a vision that transcended traditional Techno-Barbarian warfare. Several Ursh commanders accepted the Emperor's offer, bringing with them not only their personal loyalty, but also detailed knowledge of Ursh military capabilities and strategic plans. This intelligence proved invaluable in planning future operations and helped the Emperor avoid costly mistakes that might have prolonged the war unnecessarily. The success of these early campaigns established a pattern that would characterize the entire Unification Wars. The Emperor would identify strategic targets that offered maximum psychological impact, strike with overwhelming force to achieve rapid victory, and then offer generous terms to defeated enemies who were willing to join his cause. This approach minimized casualties and destruction while maximizing the rate of territorial expansion. But perhaps most importantly, these early victories demonstrated that the Emperor's vision of a unified Terra was not just a dream, but an achievable goal. For the first time since the Age of Strife began, a single leader possessed both the military capability to defeat all rivals and the political wisdom to forge lasting alliances with former enemies. The age of the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms was coming to an end, and the age of the Imperium was about to begin. The Thunder Warriors had proven themselves to be everything the Emperor had hoped they would be: the perfect weapons for conquering Terra and the ideal symbols of humanity's potential for greatness. But they were also something more than weapons or symbols. They were the bridge between the old world of endless warfare and the new world of unified purpose that the Emperor was creating. In their victories, the scattered tribes of humanity could see a glimpse of what they might become if they could set aside their ancient rivalries and work together toward a common goal. The Unification Wars were not won through a single decisive battle, but through a series of carefully planned campaigns that systematically dismantled the power structures that had dominated Terra for millennia. Each major engagement was designed to achieve specific strategic objectives while demonstrating the futility of resistance to the Emperor's growing empire. These battles became legendary not just for their military significance, but for the way they transformed the very nature of warfare on Terra. The Siege of the Tempest Galleries stands as perhaps the most technically challenging operation of the entire Unification Wars. The galleries were a vast underground complex built into the Himalayan mountains, serving as both fortress and factory for one of the most technologically advanced Techno-Barbarian kingdoms. The complex extended for hundreds of kilometers through natural caves and artificial tunnels, protected by defensive systems that had been refined over thousands of years. The kingdom that controlled the Tempest Galleries had survived the Age of Strife by retreating underground and sealing themselves off from the surface world. Their technology was among the most advanced on Terra, including weapons that could manipulate gravity and time itself. Their defensive systems were so sophisticated that they could detect and destroy incoming threats from orbit, making conventional assault impossible. The Emperor's solution was characteristically innovative and ruthless. Rather than attempting a direct assault, he ordered his forces to seal every known entrance to the complex, and then began a systematic campaign to collapse the mountain itself. Thunder Warrior engineering units, equipped with seismic charges and gravity manipulators, worked for months to destabilize the geological foundations that supported the galleries. The defenders initially dismissed this approach as futile, confident that their underground fortress could withstand any surface bombardment. But the Emperor's engineers had studied the complex's construction in detail and identified critical structural weaknesses that could be exploited. When the final charges detonated, the resulting earthquake collapsed entire sections of the galleries and trapped the defenders in their own fortress. The siege that followed lasted for over a year, as Thunder Warrior assault teams fought their way through the damaged complex room by room. The defenders' advanced weapons proved less effective in the confined spaces of their own tunnels, while the Thunder Warriors' enhanced physiology allowed them to operate in environments that would have killed normal humans. The battle became a grinding war of attrition that tested both sides' endurance and determination. The final assault on the gallery's central command complex showcased the Thunder Warriors at their most effective. Operating in perfect coordination despite the chaos of underground combat, they systematically dismantled the defenders' remaining strongpoints while preserving the technological treasures that had made the siege worthwhile. When the last defenders finally surrendered, the Emperor had gained access to technologies that would prove crucial in his later campaigns. The Battle of the Cerberus Insurrection presented an entirely different set of challenges. The Cerberus Syndicate controlled a network of orbital platforms and asteroid mining facilities that gave them effective control over Terra's space-based resources. Their military doctrine emphasized mobility and long-range firepower, using their orbital advantage to strike at surface targets while remaining beyond the reach of retaliation. The Syndicate's leaders believed that their orbital superiority made them invulnerable to surface-based forces. They had observed the Emperor's previous campaigns and concluded that the Thunder Warriors, for all their capabilities, were limited to ground-based operations. This assessment proved to be a fatal miscalculation that demonstrated the Emperor's ability to adapt his strategies to any environment. The Emperor's response to the Cerberus challenge was to develop Terra's first space-capable military force since the Age of Strife. Working with captured Techno-Barbarian technologies and his own advanced research, he created a fleet of assault craft that could operate in both atmospheric and orbital environments. These vessels were specifically designed to counter the Syndicate's advantages, with heavy armor that could withstand orbital bombardment and weapons that could engage targets at interplanetary ranges. The space battle that followed was unlike anything seen since the height of humanity's golden age. The Syndicate's orbital platforms, designed to bombard surface targets, found themselves facing enemies that could fight back on equal terms. The Thunder Warriors, who crewed the Emperor's assault craft, proved as effective in zero gravity as they were on the ground, adapting their tactics to the three-dimensional nature of space combat with characteristic efficiency. The decisive moment came when Thunder Warrior boarding parties successfully captured the Syndicate's primary command station. The assault was a masterpiece of coordination and timing, with multiple boarding craft attacking simultaneously from different vectors to overwhelm the station's defenses. The Thunder Warriors' enhanced physiology allowed them to operate effectively in the vacuum of space, while their psychological conditioning ensured that they remained focused on their objectives despite the disorienting nature of zero-gravity combat. The fall of the command station triggered a cascade of surrenders throughout the Syndicate's network. Without centralized coordination, the individual platforms and mining facilities found themselves isolated and vulnerable to piecemeal destruction. Many chose to surrender rather than face annihilation, bringing their advanced space-based technologies into the Emperor's growing arsenal. The pacification of the Rust cities represented perhaps the most challenging urban warfare campaign of the Unification Wars. The Rust cities were a sprawling complex of interconnected hive structures that stretched across what had once been the industrial heartland of Europa. The population numbered in the hundreds of millions, making it the largest concentration of humanity on Terra outside of the Emperor's own territories. The Rust City's defenders had turned their urban environment into a three-dimensional maze of fortifications, with every building, tunnel, and skybridge converted into a potential strongpoint. The civilian population had been armed and organized into militia units that could appear anywhere within the city complex, making it impossible to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. The Emperor faced a strategic dilemma that would test both his military capabilities and his political wisdom. A conventional assault would result in massive civilian casualties and the destruction of irreplaceable industrial infrastructure. But allowing the Rust cities to remain independent would leave a hostile power at the heart of his growing empire, capable of supporting resistance movements throughout Europa. The solution was a campaign of gradual infiltration and psychological warfare that lasted for several years. Rather than launching a direct assault, the Emperor's forces established a blockade around the city complex and began a systematic campaign to win over the civilian population. Thunder Warrior infiltration teams, disguised as traders and refugees, penetrated the cities and began establishing contact with dissatisfied elements within the population. The Emperor's agents spread carefully crafted propaganda that emphasized the benefits of joining the growing empire, while highlighting the futility of continued resistance. They provided food and medical supplies to areas suffering from the blockade, demonstrating that the Emperor's forces were capable of mercy as well as destruction. Most importantly, they began recruiting local allies who could provide intelligence about the city's defenses and political structure. The psychological campaign was supported by a series of limited military operations designed to demonstrate the Thunder Warriors' capabilities without causing massive destruction. Precision strikes eliminated key military targets while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. Raids captured important leaders and weapons stockpiles while avoiding areas with high civilian populations. The cumulative effect of these operations was to gradually erode the defenders' morale and political cohesion. As the blockade tightened and the Emperor's agents gained influence within the cities, more and more of the population began to question whether continued resistance was worth the cost. The final collapse came not through military defeat, but through political fragmentation, as different factions within the cities began negotiating separate surrenders. The Battle of the Glass Desert showcased the Thunder Warriors' ability to operate in the most hostile environments on Terra. The Glass Desert was a vast expanse of fused sand and crystallized atmosphere created by weapons of unimaginable power during the Men of Iron Rebellion. The region was considered uninhabitable by most Techno-Barbarian kingdoms, but it had become the refuge of a fanatical cult that worshipped the artificial intelligences that had nearly destroyed humanity. The cult's warriors were as much machine as human, having replaced most of their organic components with cybernetic implants that allowed them to survive in the desert's toxic environment. Their weapons were relics of the Men of Iron Rebellion, including self-repairing combat robots and energy weapons that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. The Emperor's decision to attack the Glass Desert was driven by both strategic and ideological considerations. The cult's worship of artificial intelligence represented everything he opposed about humanity's past mistakes, while their advanced technologies could prove valuable if captured intact. More importantly, allowing such a dangerous ideology to survive would undermine his efforts to unite humanity under a single vision of the future. The campaign in the Glass Desert tested the Thunder Warriors' endurance and adaptability to their limits. The environment itself was as dangerous as any enemy, with radiation levels that could kill unprotected humans in minutes and atmospheric conditions that corroded even advanced equipment. The Thunder Warriors' enhanced physiology allowed them to operate in these conditions, but only for limited periods before requiring medical treatment and equipment replacement. The cult's defensive strategy relied on the desert's hostile environment to weaken attacking forces before they could reach the cult's strongholds. They had established a network of automated defense systems throughout the region, using the desert's unique properties to power weapons that could strike targets from impossible ranges. The Thunder Warriors found themselves fighting not just human enemies, but also the environment itself. The breakthrough came when Thunder Warrior tech specialists managed to capture and reprogram several of the cult's combat robots. These machines, originally designed to serve the Men of Iron, possessed capabilities that exceeded even the Thunder Warriors' enhanced abilities. By turning the cult's own weapons against them, the Emperor's forces were able to penetrate their defenses and reach their central stronghold. The final battle at the Nexus of Iron was a confrontation between two radically different visions of humanity's future. The cult's leaders, more machine than human, fought with the cold efficiency of their artificial masters. The Thunder Warriors, enhanced but still fundamentally human, fought with a passion and determination that their cybernetic enemies couldn't match. The victory in the Glass Desert eliminated one of the most dangerous ideological threats to the Emperor's vision of unified humanity. But it also provided access to technologies that would prove crucial in later campaigns, including advanced cybernetics and artificial intelligence systems that could be safely employed under proper supervision. The Siege of the Bone Citadel marked the beginning of the end for organized Techno-Barbarian resistance. The Citadel was the last major stronghold of the Pan-Pacific Empire, a massive fortress built from the bones of extinct megafauna and defended by the most fanatical warriors on Terra. The Empire's military culture had produced soldiers who preferred death to surrender, making the Citadel a symbol of uncompromising resistance to the Emperor's rule. The siege lasted for 18 months and became a test of wills between two military philosophies. The Pan-Pacific defenders fought with a savagery that impressed even the Thunder Warriors, using every possible tactic to inflict casualties on their attackers. They turned the Citadel itself into a weapon, using its bone construction to channel psychic energies that could drive attackers insane. The Emperor's response was to demonstrate that even the most fanatical resistance could be overcome through superior strategy and technology. Rather than accepting the massive casualties that a direct assault would require, he ordered his forces to systematically dismantle the Citadel's defenses using long-range weapons and engineering techniques that the defenders couldn't counter. The final assault on the Bone Citadel became legendary for the Thunder Warriors' display of tactical brilliance and personal courage. Fighting through defenses that had been designed to channel attackers into killing zones, they maintained their coordination and discipline even under the most extreme pressure. When the last defenders finally fell, they had earned the respect of their enemies even in defeat. These battles, and dozens of others like them, gradually transformed Terra from a world of warring kingdoms into a unified empire. Each victory brought new territories, new technologies, and new populations under the Emperor's control. But more importantly, each battle demonstrated that the age of Techno-Barbarian independence was ending, and that a new era of human unity was beginning. The Emperor's approach to the conquest of Terra revealed a strategic mind that operated on multiple levels simultaneously, combining immediate tactical considerations with long-term political and technological objectives. His campaigns were not simply military operations designed to defeat enemies, but carefully orchestrated transformations that reshaped the very nature of human civilization on Terra. Every battle, every negotiation, and every alliance was part of a grand design that extended far beyond the immediate goal of planetary unification. The foundation of the Emperor's strategy was his understanding that the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms were not simply obstacles to be destroyed, but repositories of human knowledge and culture that needed to be preserved and integrated into his growing empire. Unlike previous conquerors who sought to impose their will through brute force, the Emperor recognized that lasting unity required the voluntary cooperation of the conquered populations. This insight shaped every aspect of his military doctrine. The Thunder Warriors were not unleashed as instruments of total destruction, but deployed as surgical tools designed to achieve specific objectives with minimal collateral damage. Their overwhelming capabilities were used primarily as psychological weapons, demonstrating the futility of resistance while offering attractive alternatives to those willing to submit voluntarily. The Emperor's intelligence network was perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of his strategic apparatus. Years before the first Thunder Warrior set foot in enemy territory, his agents had infiltrated every major Techno-Barbarian kingdom, gathering detailed information about their military capabilities, political structures, and cultural values. This intelligence allowed him to tailor his approach to each enemy, exploiting their specific weaknesses while avoiding their strengths. The infiltration operations were masterpieces of long-term planning that required agents to maintain their cover for decades while slowly building networks of contacts and informants. Many of these agents were not traditional spies, but scholars, traders, and artisans who could move freely between kingdoms while gathering the technical and cultural intelligence that the Emperor needed to plan his campaigns. The Emperor's diplomatic strategy was equally sophisticated, designed to isolate his enemies politically while building coalitions of allies who could provide support for his military operations. He understood that the Techno-Barbarian kingdom's greatest weakness was their inability to cooperate effectively against common threats, and he exploited this weakness by offering bilateral agreements that were more attractive than multilateral alliances. The terms offered to surrendering kingdoms were carefully calibrated to encourage submission while ensuring that the Emperor retained ultimate authority. Local leaders who submitted voluntarily were allowed to retain significant autonomy over their territories, but they were required to accept imperial oversight of their military forces and foreign relations. This approach allowed the Emperor to expand his control rapidly while minimizing the administrative burden of governing conquered territories. The integration of captured technologies was another crucial aspect of the Emperor's strategy. Rather than simply seizing advanced weapons and equipment for his own forces, he established research programs designed to understand and improve upon the technologies developed by the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms. This approach ensured that the knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of independent development would not be lost in the conquest. The Emperor's technical specialists worked closely with captured scientists and engineers, combining different technological traditions to create innovations that exceeded what any single kingdom could have achieved alone. The weapons and equipment that emerged from these collaborative efforts were not just more advanced than their predecessors, but represented entirely new approaches to the challenges of warfare and governance. The psychological aspects of the Emperor's strategy were perhaps the most subtle and effective elements of his approach. He understood that the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms had developed cultures that valued personal honor and martial prowess above all else, and he crafted his public image to appeal to these values while demonstrating his superiority in the very areas that his enemies considered most important. The Emperor's personal participation in combat was not simply a matter of leading from the front, but a calculated demonstration of his worthiness to rule according to Techno-Barbarian cultural standards. His victories in single combat against enemy champions established his credentials as a warrior, while his strategic genius proved his fitness as a leader. This combination of personal prowess and intellectual superiority made him an ideal figure for Techno-Barbarian warriors to follow. The timing of the Emperor's campaigns was carefully coordinated to maximize their psychological impact while minimizing the opportunities for enemy cooperation. He avoided simultaneous attacks on multiple major powers, instead focusing his forces on single targets while using diplomatic pressure and covert operations to prevent other kingdoms from providing assistance. This sequential approach allowed the Emperor to concentrate his full military strength against each enemy while demonstrating to potential allies that cooperation with his empire was more beneficial than resistance. Each victory made the next campaign easier, as the growing reputation of the Thunder Warriors and the expanding network of imperial allies reduced the willingness of remaining kingdoms to fight. The Emperor's logistical planning was equally impressive, requiring the coordination of supply lines that stretched across continents and the management of resources that included everything from advanced weapons to basic food supplies. The Thunder Warriors' enhanced physiology allowed them to operate with minimal logistical support, but the larger imperial forces that followed them required extensive infrastructure to maintain their effectiveness. The solution was the development of mobile supply bases that could be rapidly deployed to support advancing forces, while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing tactical situations. These bases were not simply collections of supplies and equipment, but complete industrial facilities capable of producing weapons, ammunition, and spare parts in the field. The Emperor's treatment of defeated enemies was perhaps the most innovative aspect of his strategic approach. Rather than executing captured leaders or enslaving defeated populations, he offered them opportunities to join his growing empire as valued contributors rather than conquered subjects. This policy not only reduced the costs of occupation, but also provided access to the specialized knowledge and skills that each kingdom had developed. The integration process was carefully managed to preserve the most valuable aspects of each kingdom's culture, while eliminating elements that conflicted with imperial unity. Local traditions and customs were maintained where possible, but political and military structures were reformed to ensure loyalty to the emperor and compatibility with imperial administration. The emperor's long-term vision extended far beyond the conquest of Terra to encompass the eventual reunification of humanity's scattered colonies throughout the galaxy. Every aspect of his strategy was designed not just to achieve immediate military objectives, but to create the foundation for a galactic empire that could survive and prosper for millennia. This vision influenced decisions that might otherwise seem purely tactical, such as the emphasis on preserving technological knowledge and the careful integration of defeated populations. The Emperor understood that the conquest of Terra was only the first step in a much larger campaign, and he was already preparing for challenges that would not emerge for decades or centuries. The success of the Emperor's strategy can be measured not just by his military victories, but by the speed and completeness with which Terra was transformed from a world of warring kingdoms into a unified empire. Within a few decades, territories that had been locked in conflict for millennia were cooperating in massive construction projects and joint military operations. The Thunder Warriors were the visible instruments of this transformation, but the true architects of victory were the Emperor's strategic vision and the sophisticated apparatus of intelligence, diplomacy, and administration that supported his military operations. The conquest of Terra was not just a military campaign, but a comprehensive transformation of human civilization that laid the foundation for everything that would follow. The final phase of the Unification Wars was characterized not by massive battles between armies, but by the systematic elimination of the last holdouts who refused to accept the new reality of imperial rule. These final campaigns required different tactics and strategies than the earlier conquests, as the remaining Techno-Barbarian leaders had learned from the defeats of their predecessors and adapted their approaches accordingly. The warlord Caligan of the Ursh Empire represented perhaps the most formidable of these final opponents. Unlike many of his contemporaries who had been caught off guard by the Emperor's initial campaigns, Caligan had spent years studying imperial tactics and developing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize the Thunder Warriors' advantages. His forces had been reorganized along imperial lines, with enhanced coordination and communication systems that allowed them to respond rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. Caligan's greatest innovation was the development of psychic warfare techniques that could disrupt the Thunder Warriors' enhanced nervous systems. Working with the most powerful psykers in the Ursh Empire, he had created weapons that attacked the mind rather than the body, potentially turning the Emperor's greatest assets into liabilities. These psychic attacks were particularly effective because the Thunder Warriors' psychological conditioning, which made them fearless and utterly loyal, also made them vulnerable to mental manipulation. The Emperor's response to this threat demonstrated his ability to adapt his strategies to counter even the most innovative enemy tactics. Rather than relying solely on the Thunder Warriors, he began deploying specialized anti-psyker units equipped with technology designed to disrupt psychic abilities. These units included both technological solutions, such as null field generators that could suppress psychic powers, and biological countermeasures, including warriors who had been specifically modified to resist mental attacks. The campaign against Caligan became a chess match between two master strategists, with each side constantly developing new tactics to counter their opponent's latest innovations. The Ursh forces proved remarkably adaptable, modifying their psychic techniques to overcome imperial countermeasures while developing new forms of warfare that exploited the Emperor's reliance on advanced technology. The decisive moment came during the Battle of the Psychic Maelstrom, when Caligan attempted to use the combined psychic power of his entire army to create a warp rift that would consume the Emperor's forces. The technique was theoretically sound and might have succeeded against any other opponent, but Caligan had underestimated the Emperor's own psychic abilities. The Emperor's intervention in the battle was the first time he had openly displayed the full extent of his supernatural powers. His psychic presence on the battlefield was so overwhelming that it not only countered Caligan's attack, but also shattered the mental conditioning that held the Ursh army together. Thousands of enemy soldiers simply laid down their weapons and surrendered, unable to continue fighting in the face of such overwhelming psychic dominance. Caligan himself fought to the end, engaging the Emperor in single combat that lasted for hours and devastated the landscape around them. The duel was as much a battle of wills as a physical confrontation, with both combatants drawing upon psychic powers that could reshape reality itself. When Caligan finally fell, his death marked the end of organized resistance in the Ursh Empire and the beginning of the final phase of the Unification Wars. The Techno-Barbarian enclaves that remained after Caligan's defeat were smaller and more isolated than the great kingdoms that had dominated Terra for millennia. Many were led by fanatics who preferred death to surrender, while others were simply too remote or well-defended to be worth the cost of conquest. The Emperor's approach to these final holdouts varied depending on their specific circumstances and strategic value. Some enclaves were simply bypassed and left to wither away as the Emperor's growing empire cut off their trade routes and sources of supply. These isolated communities gradually lost their technological advantages as their equipment broke down and their knowledge was lost to successive generations. Within a few decades, most had either voluntarily joined the Imperium or collapsed into primitive tribalism that posed no threat to imperial authority. Other holdouts required more direct intervention, particularly those that controlled strategic resources or posed ongoing threats to imperial territories. The Siege of the Bone Spires exemplified the Emperor's approach to these final campaigns. The spires were a series of fortress cities built into the peaks of what had once been the Rocky Mountains, controlled by a confederation of Techno-Barbarian clans that had refused all offers of surrender. The clans' leaders had learned from the defeats of larger kingdoms and had reorganized their defenses around the principle of making conquest so costly that the Emperor would eventually abandon his efforts. They had turned each fortress into a death trap filled with automated defenses, booby traps, and fanatical defenders who had sworn blood oaths to fight to the death. The Emperor's solution was characteristically innovative and ruthless. Rather than attempting costly direct assaults, he ordered his engineers to redirect several underground rivers to flood the valleys that supplied the spires with water and food. The siege that followed lasted for over 2 years, as the defenders slowly starved while Imperial forces waited patiently for their inevitable surrender. The psychological warfare that accompanied the siege was as important as the physical blockade. Imperial agents used advanced communication technology to broadcast messages directly into the spires, offering increasingly generous terms to any defenders who were willing to surrender. These messages were carefully crafted to exploit divisions within the Confederation and to undermine the morale of warriors who were watching their families slowly starve. The final assault on the Bone Spires came not from Imperial forces, but from within, as starving defenders finally turned against their leaders and opened the gates to Imperial troops. The Emperor's mercy toward these rebels, combined with his harsh treatment of the fanatics who had prolonged the siege unnecessarily, sent a clear message to other holdouts about the consequences of continued resistance. The pacification of the Australian wastes presented different challenges, as the nomadic Techno-Barbarian clans that controlled the continent had no fixed territories that could be besieged or conquered. These clans had survived the Age of Strife by constantly moving across the irradiated landscape in massive mobile fortresses, raiding settled communities for supplies while avoiding direct confrontation with superior forces. The Emperor's campaign against the Australian clans was a masterpiece of logistics and coordination that required tracking and engaging enemies across an entire continent. Imperial forces had to adapt to a form of warfare that emphasized mobility and endurance over technological superiority, as the clans' knowledge of the local terrain gave them significant advantages in any prolonged campaign. The breakthrough came when Imperial intelligence agents managed to infiltrate one of the smaller clans and learn the locations of the hidden supply caches that allowed the nomads to operate across such vast distances. A series of coordinated strikes destroyed these caches, forcing the clans to either surrender or face slow starvation in the wasteland. The clan leaders' decision to accept Imperial terms was influenced not just by their desperate situation, but also by the Emperor's offer to incorporate their mobile fortresses into the Imperial military as specialized reconnaissance and raiding units. This arrangement allowed the clans to maintain their traditional way of life while serving the larger Imperial cause, demonstrating the Emperor's ability to find creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems. The final Techno-Barbarian holdout was perhaps the most dangerous of all. A research facility hidden deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, where a group of scientists had been conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was considered safe or sane. These researchers had survived the Age of Strife by sealing themselves away from the surface world and pursuing knowledge without regard for ethical considerations or practical limitations. The facility's defenses were unlike anything the Imperial forces had encountered before, incorporating technologies that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. Weapons that could manipulate time and space, defensive systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and automated guardians that appeared to be constructed from pure energy rather than matter. The Emperor's decision to personally lead the assault on the Antarctic facility reflected both the extreme danger it represented and the potential value of the technologies it contained. The battle that followed was as much a confrontation between different philosophies of science and progress as it was a military engagement. The facility's defenders had transcended normal human limitations through technological enhancement, but they had also lost much of what made them human in the process. Their pursuit of knowledge without wisdom had created monsters that were more machine than man, capable of incredible feats but lacking the judgment to use their abilities responsibly. The Emperor's victory in the Antarctic facility was achieved not through superior firepower, but through his understanding of the fundamental principles that governed the defenders' technologies. By exploiting weaknesses in their dimensional manipulation systems, he was able to turn their own weapons against them and bring down defenses that had seemed impregnable. The knowledge recovered from the facility would prove invaluable in the Emperor's later projects, including the development of the Webway navigation system and the creation of the Primarchs. But perhaps more importantly, the facility's destruction eliminated the last source of truly dangerous technological innovation that operated outside Imperial control. With the fall of the Antarctic facility, the Unification Wars came to an end after decades of conflict that had transformed Terra from a world of warring kingdoms into a unified empire. The last Techno-Barbarian warlords had been defeated, their territories incorporated into the growing Imperium, and their knowledge preserved for humanity's future expansion into the galaxy. The Emperor's victory was complete, but it had come at a significant cost. Entire regions of Terra had been devastated by the fighting, millions of people had died, and irreplaceable knowledge and artifacts had been lost forever. The Thunder Warriors, who had been the instruments of victory, were already showing signs of the genetic instability that would eventually require their replacement by the more stable Space Marines. But the foundation had been laid for something greater than any Techno-Barbarian kingdom could have achieved alone. The unified Terra that emerged from the Unification Wars possessed the resources, knowledge, and unity of purpose necessary to launch humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The age of the Techno-Barbarians was over, and the age of the Imperium had begun. The aftermath of the Unification Wars presented the Emperor with a challenge almost as complex as the conquest itself, integrating the diverse technologies and knowledge systems of dozens of Techno-Barbarian kingdoms into a coherent imperial infrastructure. Each kingdom had developed its own technological specializations over thousands of years of isolation, creating a bewildering array of different approaches to everything from weapons manufacturing to environmental control. The sheer scope of the technological inheritance was staggering. The Emperor's forces had captured everything from standard template construct systems that could produce any conceivable device to experimental weapons that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality. Some technologies were so advanced that even the Emperor's most skilled technicians struggled to understand their operating principles, while others were so specialized that they could only be used under very specific conditions. The first priority was cataloging and securing the most dangerous technologies to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands or causing accidental disasters. Many Techno-Barbarian weapons were inherently unstable, designed for short-term tactical advantage rather than long-term reliability. Others incorporated psychic components that could attract unwanted attention from entities in the warp, while still others used exotic materials that could contaminate entire regions if mishandled. The Emperor established a network of secure research facilities across Terra where captured technologies could be studied and tested under controlled conditions. These facilities were staffed by the most brilliant scientists and engineers from both Imperial forces and surrendered kingdoms, creating unprecedented opportunities for collaboration between different technological traditions. The integration process revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the techno-barbarian approach to technological development. The constant warfare and resource scarcity of the Age of Strife had driven remarkable innovations in weapons technology and defensive systems, but it had also led to the neglect of more mundane but equally important technologies like agriculture, medicine, and manufacturing. Some kingdoms had developed incredibly sophisticated weapons that could destroy entire armies, but their populations suffered from diseases that could have been easily cured with basic medical knowledge. Others had created environmental control systems that could terraform entire continents, but they lacked the industrial capacity to produce enough food to feed their people adequately. The Emperor's solution was to create integrated research programs that combined the best aspects of different technological traditions while eliminating their weaknesses. Weapons specialists from the Pan-Pacific Empire worked alongside agricultural experts from the Afric League to develop new approaches to both warfare and food production. Psychic researchers from the Ursh Empire collaborated with cybernetics specialists from the Australian clans to create new forms of human enhancement. The most significant breakthrough came from the integration of standard template construct technology with the advanced manufacturing systems developed by various kingdoms. The STC systems contained the blueprints for thousands of different devices, but they required specific materials and manufacturing processes that had been lost during the Age of Strife. The Techno-Barbarian kingdoms had developed alternative approaches that could produce similar results using available resources. By combining STC blueprints with Techno-Barbarian manufacturing techniques, Imperial engineers were able to create production systems that were both more efficient and more flexible than either approach alone. These hybrid systems could produce everything from basic tools to advanced weapons using locally available materials, making them ideal for supporting the massive military campaigns that the Emperor was already planning. The integration of psychic technologies presented particular challenges, as the Emperor was determined to avoid the mistakes that had led to the disasters of the Age of Strife. The Ursh Empire's psychic research had produced remarkable results, including communication systems that could operate across interstellar distances and weapons that could strike targets in other dimensions. But these technologies also carried significant risks, as they could attract the attention of malevolent entities from the warp. The Emperor's approach was to develop new safety protocols and containment systems that could harness the benefits of psychic technology while minimizing the associated dangers. This required extensive research into the nature of the warp itself, as well as the development of new materials and techniques that could provide protection against psychic attacks. The creation of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that would eventually guide Imperial ships across the galaxy, was one of the first major projects to emerge from this research. The device combined Ursh psychic amplification technology with containment systems developed by the Emperor's own researchers, creating a tool that could project psychic signals across vast distances while remaining safely isolated from warp-based threats. The integration of cybernetic technologies was equally complex, as different kingdoms had developed radically different approaches to human enhancement. Some focused on replacing organic components with mechanical alternatives, while others emphasized the integration of biological and technological systems. Still others had developed purely biological enhancements that used genetic modification rather than mechanical implants. The Emperor's goal was to create standardized enhancement protocols that could be applied consistently across his growing military forces. This required extensive testing and experimentation to determine which approaches were most effective for different types of soldiers and different combat environments. The development of the Space Marine enhancement process was the culmination of this research, combining the best aspects of various Techno-Barbarian enhancement techniques with the Emperor's own genetic engineering capabilities. The resulting super soldiers were more stable and reliable than the Thunder Warriors, while still possessing the enhanced capabilities necessary to fight in the hostile environments that humanity would encounter during its expansion into the galaxy. The preservation of knowledge was as important as the integration of technology, as many Techno-Barbarian kingdoms possessed unique insights and techniques that could not be easily replicated. The Emperor established vast libraries and data storage facilities where this knowledge could be preserved for future generations, while also creating training programs that could pass on practical skills and techniques. The challenge was not just preserving the knowledge, but also making it accessible to future researchers and engineers. Many Techno-Barbarian techniques were highly specialized and could only be understood by practitioners who had spent years mastering the underlying principles. The Emperor's solution was to create comprehensive training programs that could produce new generations of specialists, while also developing simplified versions of complex techniques that could be used by less skilled personnel. The economic implications of technological integration were enormous, as the Emperor needed to create new industrial systems that could support his planned expansion into the galaxy. The Techno-Barbarian kingdoms had developed their technologies in isolation, with each kingdom creating its own supply chains and manufacturing processes. Integrating these systems required massive investments in new infrastructure and the retraining of millions of workers. The Emperor's approach was to create standardized production systems that could manufacture the most important technologies while maintaining the flexibility to produce specialized equipment when needed. This required careful planning and coordination to ensure that the new systems could meet the demands of both military expansion and civilian needs. The transformation of Terra's industrial base was one of the most visible signs of the technological integration process. Massive new factories and research facilities were constructed across the planet, while existing installations were upgraded with the best technologies from all the conquered kingdoms. The result was an industrial capacity that exceeded anything that any single Techno-Barbarian kingdom could have achieved alone. The military applications of the integrated technologies were immediately apparent as Imperial forces began fielding weapons and equipment that combined the best features of different Techno-Barbarian designs. The new Imperial Guard regiments were equipped with standardized weapons that incorporated innovations from dozens of different kingdoms, while specialized units received custom equipment designed for specific mission requirements. But perhaps the most important aspect of the technological integration was its role in preparing humanity for the challenges that lay ahead. The Emperor understood that the conquest of Terra was only the first step in a much larger campaign to reunite humanity's scattered colonies throughout the galaxy. The technologies and knowledge systems that emerged from the integration process would provide the foundation for this unprecedented expansion. The legacy of Techno-Barbarian technology can be seen throughout the later history of the Imperium, from the weapons carried by space marines to the massive starships that carry Imperial armies across the galaxy. The integration process that followed the Unification Wars created the technological foundation upon which the entire Imperium was built, demonstrating the Emperor's vision of turning humanity's greatest weakness, its tendency toward division and conflict, into its greatest strength through unity and cooperation. The transformation of Terra from a world of warring Techno-Barbarian kingdoms into the unified capital of a galactic empire represents one of the most profound changes in human history. The legacy of the Techno-Barbarian age extended far beyond the immediate military and technological achievements of the Unification Wars, shaping the fundamental character of the Imperium that would emerge from Terra's ashes. The governmental structure of the early Imperium bore clear traces of its Techno-Barbarian origins, despite the Emperor's efforts to create something entirely new. The feudal hierarchy that characterized Techno-Barbarian society, with its emphasis on personal loyalty and martial prowess, became the foundation for the imperial system of planetary governors and military commanders. The concept of rule through strength and technological superiority, which had dominated Techno-Barbarian politics for millennia, was transformed into the imperial doctrine of human supremacy and technological mastery. The Emperor's decision to preserve many Techno-Barbarian traditions while adapting them to serve imperial purposes demonstrated his understanding that lasting change required evolution rather than revolution. The warrior cultures that had sustained humanity through the Age of Strife were not destroyed, but redirected toward the conquest of the galaxy rather than the conquest of neighboring kingdoms. The Space Marine legions that would spearhead the Great Crusade were perhaps the most direct inheritors of the Techno-Barbarian legacy. The legion structure, with its emphasis on brotherhood, honor, and technological mastery, reflected the values that had made the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms successful. The recruitment practices that drew aspirants from warrior cultures across the galaxy echoed the Techno-Barbarian tradition of selecting leaders based on personal prowess and dedication. Even the Primarchs, the Emperor's genetically engineered sons who would lead the Space Marine legions, embodied the Techno-Barbarian ideal of the warrior scholar. Each Primarch combined superhuman physical capabilities with intellectual brilliance, making them perfect leaders for armies that valued both technological sophistication and personal courage. The imperial military doctrine that emerged from the Unification Wars bore the clear influence of Techno-Barbarian tactical innovations. The emphasis on combined arms warfare, the integration of advanced technology with traditional military virtues, and the use of elite units to achieve decisive victories all trace their origins back to the campaigns that had unified Terra. The Thunder Warriors, despite their eventual replacement by the more stable Space Marines, had established the template for superhuman soldiers that would define Imperial military thinking for millennia. The concept of genetically enhanced warriors who could operate independently in hostile environments while maintaining absolute loyalty to their commanders became central to Imperial strategy. The technological legacy of the Techno-Barbarian Age was equally profound, providing the foundation for many of the Imperium's greatest achievements. The standard template construct systems that had been preserved and improved during the integration process became the basis for Imperial manufacturing, allowing the rapid production of weapons and equipment across thousands of worlds. The psychic technologies developed by kingdoms like the Ursh Empire were refined and expanded to create the Astronomicon and other psychic infrastructure that made galactic travel possible. The cybernetic enhancements pioneered by various Techno-Barbarian factions evolved into the augmentation systems used by the Adeptus Mechanicus and other Imperial organizations. Perhaps most importantly, the Techno-Barbarian tradition of technological innovation and adaptation became embedded in Imperial culture, creating a civilization that could rapidly develop new solutions to unprecedented challenges. The diversity of technological approaches that had characterized the Techno-Barbarian Age was preserved within the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, ensuring that humanity retained the flexibility to adapt to whatever threats it might encounter. The cultural impact of the Techno-Barbarian legacy was more subtle, but equally significant. The emphasis on personal honor and martial prowess that had characterized Techno-Barbarian society became central to Imperial ideology, creating a civilization that valued courage and sacrifice above comfort and safety. The tradition of technological mastery as a mark of nobility evolved into the imperial cult of knowledge and the reverence for ancient technologies that would define the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Techno-Barbarian concept of leadership through personal example rather than bureaucratic authority influenced the imperial system of command, creating a military culture where officers were expected to lead from the front and share the dangers faced by their troops. This tradition would prove crucial during the Great Crusade, as imperial forces encountered enemies and environments that required adaptive leadership and personal courage rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. The religious and philosophical implications of the Techno-Barbarian legacy were perhaps the most complex aspects of the transformation. Many Techno-Barbarian kingdoms had developed their own belief systems during the Age of Strife, ranging from the worship of ancient technologies to elaborate mythologies that explained their survival in terms of divine favor. The Emperor's challenge was to create a unified imperial ideology that could incorporate these diverse traditions, while promoting loyalty to his vision of human destiny. The imperial truth that emerged from this synthesis emphasized reason, science, and human potential, while rejecting supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. This ideology drew heavily on the Techno-Barbarian tradition of technological mastery, but it also incorporated elements from various kingdom mythologies that emphasized human superiority and the destiny of the species to rule the galaxy. The irony of this transformation was that the Emperor, in seeking to eliminate superstition and religious thinking, had created a belief system that would eventually evolve into the very kind of religious orthodoxy he had sought to prevent. The reverence for technology and the worship of human achievement that characterized the imperial truth contained the seeds of the religious fanaticism that would later define the Imperium. The administrative systems that governed the early Imperium reflected the practical lessons learned during the integration of the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms. The Emperor had discovered that direct control over such diverse populations was both impossible and counterproductive, leading to the development of the federal system that allowed significant local autonomy while maintaining imperial unity. This approach, which had proven successful in integrating the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms, became the template for governing the thousands of worlds that would be brought into the Imperium during the Great Crusade. Local traditions and customs were preserved where possible, but political and military authority was centralized under imperial control. The economic systems of the early Imperium were built upon the industrial foundations laid during the technological integration process. The massive manufacturing complexes that had been created to produce weapons and equipment for the Unification Wars were expanded and adapted to support the even greater demands of galactic conquest. The techno-barbarian tradition of technological innovation was institutionalized through the creation of research and development programs that could rapidly adapt existing technologies to new challenges. This flexibility would prove crucial during the Great Crusade, as Imperial forces encountered alien technologies in hostile environments that required constant adaptation and innovation. The social transformation that accompanied the creation of the Imperium was perhaps the most profound change of all. The Techno-Barbarian age had been characterized by small, tightly knit communities, bound together by personal loyalty and shared hardship. The Imperium required the creation of a much larger social structure that could encompass billions of people across thousands of worlds. The solution was to preserve the essential elements of Techno-Barbarian social organization while scaling them up to galactic proportions. The concept of personal loyalty to charismatic leaders was maintained through the imperial system of oaths and honors, while the tradition of technological mastery as a mark of status was institutionalized through the various imperial organizations and their hierarchies. The educational systems that emerged from this transformation reflected both the practical needs of the Imperium and the cultural values inherited from the Techno-Barbarian age. The emphasis on technical training and military discipline that had characterized Techno-Barbarian education was expanded to include the broader knowledge base required for galactic administration and exploration. The creation of specialized schools and academies for different imperial organizations ensured that the diverse skills and knowledge systems developed during the Techno-Barbarian age would be preserved and transmitted to future generations. The Schola Progenium, the various military academies, and the training facilities of the Adeptus Mechanicus all traced their origins back to the educational institutions that had sustained the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms through the Age of Strife. The artistic and cultural legacy of the Techno-Barbarian age was preserved through the imperial tradition of honoring the past while building for the future. The great works of art and architecture that had been created during the Age of Strife were restored and preserved as monuments to human achievement, while new works were commissioned that celebrated the unity and purpose of the emerging Imperium. The imperial aesthetic that emerged from this synthesis combined the technological sophistication of the Techno-Barbarian age with a grandeur and scale that reflected the Imperium's galactic ambitions. The massive cathedrals and palaces that would characterize imperial architecture drew inspiration from the fortress cities of the Techno-Barbarian kingdoms, while incorporating new elements that emphasized the unity and power of the imperial system. The transformation of Terra from a world of warring kingdoms into the capital of a galactic empire was completed within a few decades of the end of the Unification Wars. The speed and completeness of this transformation demonstrated both the effectiveness of the Emperor's vision and the adaptability of the human populations that had survived the Age of Strife. But perhaps the most important aspect of this transformation was its demonstration that humanity could transcend its limitations and achieve something greater than the sum of its parts. The Techno-Barbarian kingdoms, for all their achievements, had been limited by their isolation and their focus on immediate survival. The Imperium that emerged from their unification possessed the resources, knowledge, and unity of purpose necessary to attempt the conquest of the entire galaxy. The legacy of the Techno-Barbarian age would continue to influence the Imperium throughout its history, providing both the foundation for its greatest achievements and the seeds of its eventual decline. The warrior culture that had sustained humanity through its darkest hour would prove both a strength and a weakness in the millennia to come, as the Imperium struggled to balance the demands of constant warfare with the need for progress and adaptation. The technologies and knowledge systems that had been preserved and integrated during the transformation would provide the tools necessary for humanity's expansion across the galaxy, but they would also become sources of stagnation and orthodoxy as the Imperium grew larger and more bureaucratic. The flexibility and innovation that had characterized the Techno-Barbarian age would gradually give way to the rigid dogma and technological conservatism that would define the later Imperium. But in those early days, as the Emperor prepared to launch humanity toward the stars, the legacy of the Techno-Barbarian age represented nothing but potential and promise. The unity that had been forged in the crucible of the Unification Wars would carry humanity to heights of achievement that no single kingdom could have imagined, creating an empire that would endure for 10,000 years and shape the destiny of the entire galaxy. And there we have it, the complete story of the Techno-Barbarians of Ancient Earth, the warrior kings who ruled Terra during humanity's darkest hour, and whose legacy shaped the very foundations of the Imperium of Man. From the ashes of the Age of Strife to the birth of the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known, we've witnessed how these remarkable civilizations preserved human knowledge and culture through thousands of years of warfare and chaos. The Techno-Barbarians were far more than simple post-apocalyptic raiders with advanced weapons. They were the guardians of human civilization during its most vulnerable period, the innovators who pushed technology to incredible heights under impossible conditions, and ultimately, the raw material from which the Emperor forged his galactic empire. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and transformation that continues to echo through the 41st millennium. We've seen how their diverse kingdoms, from the psychic masters of Ursh to the mobile fortresses of the Australian clans, each developed unique solutions to the challenges of survival in a hostile world. We've witnessed the rise of the Thunder Warriors, the first of the Emperor's super soldiers, specifically designed to defeat these technologically advanced opponents. And we've followed the epic campaigns of the Unification Wars as the Emperor systematically conquered and integrated these proud kingdoms into his growing empire. Perhaps most importantly, we've explored how the Techno-Barbarian legacy lived on in the Imperium that emerged from Terra's unification. The Space Marine legions, the Imperial military doctrine, the technological foundations of the Great Crusade, even the feudal structure of imperial government all trace their origins back to the warrior kingdoms of ancient Terra. The Techno-Barbarians remind us that even in humanity's darkest moments, when civilization itself seemed on the verge of extinction, there were those who refused to surrender to despair. They preserved not just human life, but human potential, maintaining the knowledge and technologies that would eventually carry our species to the stars. Their brutal pragmatism and savage nobility were the price humanity paid for survival, and their legacy became the foundation upon which the greatest empire in galactic history was built. In many ways, the Techno-Barbarians represent the best and worst of human nature. They were capable of incredible cruelty and devastating warfare, but they were also capable of remarkable innovation and unwavering loyalty. They embodied the contradictions that would define the Imperium for millennia to come. The tension between progress and tradition, between unity and diversity, between the dream of a better future and the harsh realities of survival in a hostile universe. Their story is ultimately a testament to human resilience and adaptability. When faced with the collapse of everything they had built, when confronted with threats that seemed insurmountable, humanity didn't simply survive. It evolved. The Techno-Barbarians were the bridge between the golden age that had been lost and the galactic empire that was yet to come, proving that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could not be extinguished. As we look back on their legacy from the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, we can see both the seeds of the Imperium's greatest triumphs and the roots of its eventual stagnation. The warrior culture that sustained humanity through the Age of Strife became both the driving force behind the Great Crusade and the source of the endless warfare that would consume the galaxy. The technological mastery that made the Techno-Barbarians so formidable became both the foundation of imperial power and the object of religious veneration that would stifle innovation. But in those early days, as the Emperor stood upon the newly unified Terra and gazed up at the stars, the legacy of the Techno-Barbarians represented nothing but potential. The unity they had helped forge, the technologies they had preserved, and the warrior spirit they had embodied would carry humanity to heights of achievement that no single kingdom could have imagined. The Techno-Barbarians of Ancient Earth were the last chapter of humanity's childhood and the first chapter of its galactic destiny. Their story reminds us that even the mightiest empires have humble beginnings, and that sometimes the greatest achievements arise from the darkest circumstances. In the end, they were exactly what humanity needed them to be: the guardians of our past and the architects of our future. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the origins of the Imperium and want to see more content exploring the darkest corners of Warhammer lore, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Lore of Hammer. Your support helps us continue bringing you these comprehensive explorations of the grim darkness of the far future. What aspect of Warhammer lore would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. but there are also incredible stories waiting to be told.